Paul asked me to do this quite a while ago, like almost a year. And so I've been living with it for a year. She was talking about Z's. After this presentation, you'll probably be all asleep.
Well, then liven it up.
I'll liven it up. Okay, first I'd like to introduce you to my grandfather. His name was Guy Bixler. He was born March 25th, 1894 in Blackwell, Oklahoma. And his family moved and homesteaded at Nashville, Colorado. If you don't know where that's at, it's probably about 40 miles from Durango, Colorado. So anyway, my grandfather was married October the 25th, 1920. And he went out on his own and homesteaded a place in Arbalise, Colorado. And one day he was plowing a plot of land, and he turned up a Spanish sword. And he had it for many years. He cleaned it up. And one day, upon retiring from the farm to enjoy his golden years, they moved to Farmington, New Mexico. And we would have family gatherings there. I had 6 aunts and uncles, and there were 29 cousins. And of course, they were spread out over a number of years. But one of these gatherings, he brought the sword out to show everybody. And I remember looking at it and just seeing it. And then Paul was asked me to share the story about him finding the Spanish sword. And most of the older cousins have passed. I have one cousin that I know was there at that meeting. I think I was probably about 6 years old when I saw it. So I called him and we compared notes. And here's the description on the sword that we came up with. We put our heads together so we could remember this. It was a straight double-edged sword about approximately 30 inches long, tapered to a point. It had sharp edges on both sides, and of course they were pretty rusty. It was badly rusty. The hilt was made out of, was brass plated, and it had spots of silver on it, and probably had to do with the years that it was buried, and of course my granddad cleaning it up. It had a crown on the crest of the hilt in the middle of the hilt. It also had traces of silver on it. And it also had inscription letters across the hilt. And he couldn't barely even read them. So he did a good job cleaning it up, obviously. The scabbard was covered with leather. There had to be some kind of metal in there to encase the sword. But the leather was in very bad condition. And it had a hook on it. The hook was iron, and it went over, and so you could put it on your belt. The handle was covered with leather, and it was in bad condition. I assumed that it was probably brass underneath. And on the end of the top of the sword, there was a brass knob, and that was the description of the sword. Just so this question won't come up, I don't know where the sword is. My grandfather, after he retired, 1972, my grandmother passed away. And then about 3 years later, through some incidents that happened there at the house, he almost burned the house down in Farmington, New Mexico. And the daughters got together and they talked him into going into assisted living facility. And when he did, his four eldest daughters, who are now deceased, they went and they cleaned up the place for sale. They went through all this stuff and they divided it out to everybody. And my relatives are scattered everywhere. And you know, if I knew where it was, I wouldn't even pursue it anyway, because it was something that our family had, and these daughters, they took the time to sort it out. I received this watch. They took time to do that for everyone, and whoever has a sword, God bless them. They can have it. So. The next little story here, I'd like to introduce you to my dad. In 1956, he wanted to fish Lime Creek. Lime Creek is south of Silverton, Colorado. And he started where the Highway 550 crosses over Lime Creek. Now, in 1956, wasn't the original highway. It's been changed a lot. And so, but anyway, that's where he took off. And he slid a long ways down that hill, I'll trust you, and it was all downhill. And he went down there and he started fishing and fished down, and then he decided he was going to come back. The car, before my mom called for help to retrieve him, because she was very worried. She always worried about him a lot. He liked to go in old mines and caves. I was never allowed to go in with him. So I think that was a good thing. But anyway, he got down and he decided that it was time to head home. He started up the Lime Creek. He crossed the river and went up the other side. And there's a little tributary coming into it, and it was dry. There wasn't any water running in it, but he thought, well, I'll walk up this way. Then he realized he was getting farther away from the car, so he decided to cut across. And he got across about halfway to where he needed to be, and he came across a deadfall where all the trees were piled up and stuff, and he started wading through that, and he found a brass cannon. The brass cannon, I know it was brass because he said he took his pocket knife out and he scratched it, and it was brass. He said it was about 4 feet long. It had a bore of about 5 inches, and the thickness up there was 2 inches. And he said it was very heavy. He told this story many, many times, and I know it's still there.
Because you've seen it.
No, I haven't seen it. Then in the early 1980s, the people that he was working for, they leased a helicopter, and he worked the oil field all his life. And his boss bought a helicopter so he could fly out to various locations where they were working. And so this gave my dad an idea to ask the boss if he could borrow the helicopter for a day if he'd pay for the gas. And his boss said, yeah, go ahead. And he told him what he was going to do, and what he was going to do was trying to find some place in the area where that cannon was. And so they flew up there, and it was a bust. There was updrafts, downdrafts. The helicopter pilot was white-knuckled. They couldn't find any place to land, and it was rough territory. So Dad tried, but he gave up retrieving the cannon. However, I can tell you, it's probably still there. So if any of you want to take an adventure, go down Lime Creek, way down, and then start back and go up every right-handed tributary. and crossed through all the woods. And you may find it, but it's because I believe it's still there. So, and no, I'm not gonna go get it. I didn't even want to when I was younger. One final note, I don't, how much time I got?
You got 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. In 1974, I came to work with Becker Power Corporation. And there was reports of a Spanish breastplate that was found on the Vermilion Cliffs, these cliffs here. It was found by an iron worker working at NGS. But nobody could give me a name. So I don't know if the rumor was true, but being up on the Vermilion Cliffs, which is really hard to get up there now because of the condors and the wild wilderness and all that, it's possible, but I didn't see anything else. How much time I got left? Well, I'll try to hurry this one.
No, you're good.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about Chapman.
Yeah, this is a story of my grandpa Chapman.
You got 5, 10 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. In the early 1920s, he moved to down to Hickley, Arizona. That was the closest place to his farm. He actually was up closer to the Superstitious Mountains. And one day, this prospector showed up. He had 3 burros. And he asked my granddad if he could pasture 2 of the burros there, that he had found the Lost Dutchman mine. And that he was going to go into town and see what it would take to get a claim on it. So anyway, my grandfather agreed to that, and he says, you found the Lost Dutchman? He says, oh yeah. He says, let me show you. And he brought out 2 flour sacks. And now my dad was there. He was probably 8 or 9 years old, and my uncle Rodney was probably about 13, and they were the younger boys. So. Not totally younger, but anyway, he opened up the sack and showed it to him. And my dad said that they were rocks and it had gold streaks through it. So at that, the guy took off. He said that he'd be back in a week. So he took one of the burros with him. But he left all his goods and everything there with my granddad. Well, 2 weeks passed. He never showed up. So, my granddad started to worry, so he goes into Phoenix and finds the sheriff. Gives the guy the name, which my dad could never remember. He says, I don't remember what the guy's name was. But he went into the sheriff, but my granddad knew his name. And he went into the sheriff, gave him his name and all the information of what happened and everything. And he says, well, let's give it another 2 weeks, and I'm going to put a couple of deputies on this and check all the places, hotels, and all of that to see if we can locate this guy. So my granddad went back the next 2 weeks, and the guy says, my deputies went everywhere asking about this gentleman. And nobody knows who he is or what's going on. So my grandfather says, well, what do I do? I have all this stuff. And the sheriff says, well, he paid you for taking care of the burros for 2 weeks. So if he's not back in a week, they belong to you. And the guy didn't come back in a week, and he didn't come back in a month. He never came back. And my granddad ended up with a shotgun, a .30-30 lever action rifle, all this guy's goods and 2 girls,
But no gold.
but no gold.
But no gold. You mean he didn't leave the sacks behind?
No, he took them with him. Questions?
Where's the blood
Last
judgment mine?